Welcome to the New York Business Leaders Podcast, presented by the Coyle Group. We interview the most interesting and influential business leaders in New York and hear their stories of success, challenges, and lessons learned while building their businesses and personal brands. New episodes drop weekly, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates on your favorite stream. Without further delay, here's your host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast, Gordon Coyle.
Welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Gordon Coyle. This is our second episode, and I'm super happy to bring you a conversation I had with Michael Kaufman from the Kaufman Organization, a New York City-based commercial real estate developer, owner, manager, and leasing firm. This conversation was recorded in mid-May as New York City began to open back up and come to life. And Michael's insights into what is happening now and will happen in and around the city with regard to real estate is insightful. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation, and I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe and rate this podcast. Lastly, if you have an interesting story and would like to tell it, please let me know. I'm always looking for interesting conversations. Drop me an email, and my email address will be in the show notes. Now, let's get on to the conversation with Michael. Michael Kaufman, welcome to the show. Good to have you here. How's it going?
Gordon, always good to talk with you, my friend. It's going, it's a Tuesday, and it's been a long time, but I see, things are heading the right way, and it's sunny out, and we're in May, so I'm liking the vibe.
That's good. So before we jump into the interview, can you give us just a quick introduction about you and your firm and what you do?
Sure. So I'm one of the partners here at the Kaufman Organization. My primary role is heading up the leasing and brokerage team representing office tenants throughout the city with regards to their office lease. And that's done one of three ways. Number one is the most obvious. Hey, Mike, we are looking for new office space. Can you help us find that? The second one, which has been probably a fair amount of work over the pandemic, was, hey, Mike, we have space we're not using. Can you help us sublease or assign this? And the third one is, Mike, we've been here for 8 years. Our lease is coming up in the next 6 to 24 months, and we don't know what the market looks like. Can you help us renegotiate our renewal? The firm I'm with is a 105-year-old real estate company. Also happen to own and manage about 7 million square feet of office space throughout the city. Like I said, my primary role is representing tenants. I'd say the most part is not in the Kaufman buildings, pure promotional brokerage work. If it just so happens that one of our buildings has the right space for it, I make the connection, but really just outside representing companies.
Great. Is there a specific area in Manhattan that you focus on?
So it's the office market. I do not really get involved in a lot of the retail, things like that. So let's say 60th Street down to Battery Park, and kind of river to river. And the office market has expanded. When I first started in '96, the meatpacking district was the meatpacking district. That became an area where most people can't even afford to get office space or live. So the boundaries have grown over time, but that's really neat. The evolution of the office market and neighborhoods in Manhattan continue to evolve. So, and that'll happen again right after this last year or so. You're going to watch another evolution of spaces and companies, and things will go to the next generation.
Yep. And I've seen in some of the listings that you send out in your email blast that you seem to have a focus in technology and financial service firms, and that's probably largely due to the neighborhoods that you work in. Is there any other verticals that you focus on?
And the traditional office user, the best part about my career is I've worked with so many different companies. You really get to understand and learn whether it's an engineering company, an accounting firm, obviously a hedge fund, venture capital, and then you'll get, offshoot of a technology company could be one of a million different verticals. They could be biotech, which has been a huge run. Then you get someone developing apps. So really just anyone who occupies space in New York City. Gordon, like yourself, insurance work, things like that. There's so many different types of companies. So the specifics, where I focus on seems to be in technology and the private financial sector, but then always offshoots to other opportunities.
It's kind of representative of what New York City is all about and how dynamic it is.
Truly a melting pot. Really. You take a building, even like our own office building, 200 tenants, and you have probably overlap of maybe 10% of certain professional services, a law firm or CPAs, and then you have people who do completely different things. So that really gives a good snapshot. It's quite the vast menu.
And it makes every day interesting, doesn't it?
Sure. And everyone's office space requirement is different. You need X amount of space, but what do you do? Who are you as a company? Where do you see yourself going? Do you plan on selling the business in X years? Is there an exit strategy? And all those pieces go into helping find somebody the space for them, not just space.
Yep, great. So you mentioned earlier that COVID, of course, we're just coming out of it. This is being recorded in mid-May 2021. So you've had tremendous disruption in what you do for a living over the last 12, 13, 14 months. You mentioned a little bit of it. Maybe you can give us kind of a snapshot of where you are and what you see today and what's going on around commercial real estate.
Sure. I mean, I've lived through 2000, 9/11, and that was, a big shutdown, obviously, and then lived through 2009, 10 when everything just kind of paused again. But this is obviously something that has gone to a level none of us thought that would ever happen, and truly everything just stopped. It really just stopped in the beginning. I mean, we had many conversations and very, very strange times. And then you watch probably when we hit just around the end of 2020, 2021, vaccines, you're starting to see some groundwork poured, rumblings. There were a few small deals here and there for people that were just going to grab an opportunity. They probably weren't going to use the space right away, but saw an opportunity to get, a fire sale, and we're still going to work from home and had a future plan of returning at some time. I'd say when we hit about a month ago, so many different pieces, the amount of people that are vaccinated, the city opening back up, on the 19th, our government says you're 100% back to occupancy. People know schools, children will be, and that's a big one, by the way. Everyone asks, when will people go back? And being a parent and just thinking about stuff, the most important thing is it's hard for people to return back to work on a full schedule if you don't know where your children are going to be or who's going to watch them. And I think that's the biggest one. And for the most part, I believe by September, kids are going to be back in school, which they need. It's so important just for their mental stability and health. They'll all be back in school come September. And that opens the workforce back up to go back. And that basis, the reality is we live via the big newspapers, right, Gordon, the big blogs or whatever you want to call it these days, social media. And all you really hear about is 5 different industries or companies. You hear about the banks and their policies of returning, not returning. You hear about this little company called Google, returning, not returning. You hear a company called Apple, returning, not returning. Facebook. But the reality is everybody else is not those companies. You and I are privately held. Majority of the companies in New York City are privately held firms who do, operate independently. Now let's go back to those big companies. Apple took an additional 200,000 square feet during the pandemic, literally a block away from me. I'm fortunate enough to run the building they occupy as their New York headquarters right now, down in Union Square. They've been my tenant for a number of years. They don't say too much. They're very quiet. It's Apple. But at the same time, do you think they would take 200,000 feet of space if they weren't going to use it? Facebook signed during the pandemic for 750,000 square feet of the entire post office and built out. I mean, this is a major multi-$100 million project. Do you think they would sign for something like that? They never thought everyone was going to go back to work. So what I've seen in the last, let's call it 30 days, leases are getting signed. I've actually had 2 people I was representing for subleasing their space have decided we're taking it off the market. We are going back to the office. And that's a personal scale. Some people are going back full time. Some people are going back 2 or 3 days a week, 1 day a week. But the key phrase is, we will be back in the office X days a week. So in my world, that means activity, restaurants opening back up at capacity 75%. New York's starting to evolve again. So activity has turned up big time in my world in the last 30 days or so in the most positive way.
That's great to hear. And you mentioned how the media kind of plays a big role in that. And, the media can be right, it can be wrong, it can try to influence decisions and influence kind of culture. But I think that everything that we thought may not necessarily be true. Media can influence, popular opinion and culture. But I think that even what we're seeing happen so rapidly in New York and probably in a lot of other urban centers isn't being predicted by the media. There's a lot of cultural conversations around unemployment benefits and work habits and what people want. You touched on something, with regard to people who have been working from home. They may not be able to leave home if their kids aren't leaving home to go to school. So that's a big influence. So I guess the point I'm making is that things don't necessarily all move in the same direction at the same time. And coming out of the pandemic, especially in New York City, we're seeing massive changes happening very quickly that don't follow any particular set of rules or guidelines that the media wants us to think that they should follow.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think we're also going to see it's a generational change of the workforce, and knowing many people that have hybrids of work plans going forward, and it's really done in pencil because everything during this pandemic is let's figure it out each day, each week, right? But I can't tell you, even several young people that work with me who either moved back home or did whatever during the pandemic have all now leased apartments in the city, and they're back. And so interesting enough, in talking with clients, there's new staff hiring, and it's a new generation that has moved back into the city. People who couldn't afford to live in the city, or a young person that was in college dreams. So you're going to see this evolution over the next 6-8 months. I think we're going to have a tremendous change of in a positive way of how things are going to go. And the work from home thing, I support it. It's not if you can get your work done from home, great. The reality is the proof's going to be in the pudding at the end of the day when you look at the bottom line of the company, right? Did we make money? Are we not making money? Who's performing? Who's not performing? And that's the case whether you're in the office or not. But I always go back, we're social creatures, and collaboration and just efficiency to be able to just talk to somebody and say, by the way, do you have that file, or what about this? Then the delay of an email or a phone call, at a certain point, that's going to become a bottleneck of how companies can work. And if somebody starts to lose to their competition, it's going to cause changes like it always does.
Yeah, it's interesting you should bring up collaboration. I was listening to my daughter and my niece. My niece works for a marketing firm in Boston, and my daughter works for JP Morgan in communications, and kind of is attached to some marketing functions. And the two of them kind of agreed that in their industry or their specialization, collaboration is huge. And you can do that to some degree on Teams or Zoom or whatever your corporate infrastructure supports. But being able to walk down the hallway or grab a person to come into your office or sit in the conference room and kind of go through bullet points or whatever the topics are, is missing. And I think that, combined with the social aspect of work, is going to, I think, influence a lot of, especially younger people moving forward. Folks my age and older, they may be saying, you know what, not commuting every day is pretty cool. I enjoy that. But nevertheless, I think that it's a moving target, and we're not really going to be able to predict exactly what's going to happen. And the companies that are flexible and kind of go with the flow and have a little bit of flexibility, I think will really kind of do well with that over the next 6 to 12 months.
Oh yeah, and it's the first time in a long time I've seen where obviously it's a tenant's market, and if you're looking for space, now's the time to do it. Ironically, you want to. The sublease market is what dominates the vacancy right now in New York City. So there's a lot of things you can look at that are kind of turnkey, ready to go. But remember, subleases have to be a really perfect fit in order for it to make sense. And then you also have to make sure you're not going to take a sublease for something in a year and a half in a building that's $100 a square foot, and you're subleasing it for $50, because when the lease comes up, you're probably going to have to move again. Even if the building's at 80, something's going to happen. But It is a time, the other one is I've packaged a deal recently for a company, and the gentleman said, well, our lease really isn't up till December. Very viable firm. It's a landlord's dream. Been in business 30 years, terrific financials, great office use. So I went to the landlord, we scouted some space out, and I went to the prospective landlord. I said, here's the reality. We'd love to take your space. We could take it for 5 or 7 years. We need some work done, but my client's lease expiration isn't until December. Normally that'd be a little far out. This is going back about a month or so. And the landlord says, Mike, the reality is I'll make that deal today because I still have to build the space. We still have to negotiate a lease. And I have certainty in my pocket that I'm going to get a customer like this and not lose them later on to something else. I modeled 8 months of downtime anyway to have vacancy because of the amount of things. So they viewed it as a victory, and the tenant was very, very happy. So, the reality is you can approach opportunities now further out than you think and get them to where before that was the landlord would say, or even the sublandlord, I'm not going to keep this off the market that long. We're paying for this. So listen, everything else, ups and downs creates opportunity.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about some sublets that you've posted in your email blast, where it looks like it's a fully outfitted office. It's beautiful, desks, and everything is really perfect. Does the technology typically go with those deals, or do the computers all come out? I'm just curious about that.
It's a good question. Traditionally, most companies, what they all want is to have the wiring. The physical wiring costs money to network the space. And people would like the ability to plug in their router or their server, clip a wire in, run it through, and then clip it to their desktop, laptop, or whatever device. Traditionally, the computers do not stay. There's probably a lot of IT proprietary information not sharing. Phones are interesting. Sometimes phones will stay because they're on a lease or they've been purchased and somebody wants to take things over. But that's usually the technology side. 9 times out of 10, people are taking care of their own technology requirement. The furniture obviously is the key to it. There's, depending on the size of space, that could be from a couple $1,000s to hundreds of $1,000s of saving and aggravation and time. So yeah, it's a big piece, going forward.
And a lot of those firms that you were featuring the listings on, what happened to those companies that were abandoning or giving up their space that looked so beautiful? What are those companies doing today?
Thankfully, when you take on a sublease assignment, and this is also where you have to watch what the newspapers say and do. There's these great deals out there, and by the way, you're going to lease space from somebody that may not be in business or hasn't been current with their rent. That deal's not going to happen. Where you may lease from somebody who's going to go out of business, you're going to be in big trouble. Unfortunately, the landlord's not going to give you the same deal as a sublease. So thankfully, the people we're working with, they're doing fine. Some are prospering, and when the reality was, they're just changing their model of how they're going to work. So if they're not using this space, the reality was discount it. Let me get a X percentage return back for what we're doing, regroup, and some have upsized ironically and saw an opportunity they were paying a cheap rent and subleasing great space. And other ones flat out said, listen, we're only back at 25% sales force, or staff in the space. Why are we paying for 100% of the space? Let's just sublease it. Let's regroup. And then you can go find us a sublease a deal, So yeah, for the most part, everybody like yourselves, we've all figured out how to do it somehow, some way. That is the human New York way, right? You got to figure it out. The world doesn't wait for you. So they have. So that's really what's happened. And even like I said, some of the deals we've made, the plans for the people taking the sublease are not to occupy them 100% today, but they know in the next 6 to 12 months they're going to be back there, whether it's in full force, 50%, 75%, and it's an opportunity. But they are going to be back in an office with their team.
And that kind of brings up the next subject, and that is, what do you see happening over the next 6 to 12 months in the New York real estate market?
So ironically, it's already starting to hit the papers. There is activity. People are starting to realize, okay, we are going back. It is happening. Activity's picked up tremendously. Not too long ago, freshly signed a lease for 100,000 square feet, building out all new brand new space. I mean, that's, it's a great company. I read an article this morning up in Boston. There's a company called Hoop or Swoop, 400 employees, just signed for a huge lease, and they're a technology company. Our last boom was driven by the tech world, which had high density, a lot of employees, everyone all in. What I'm seeing now is filling in for more traditional users, engineering, construction, architecture, accounting. I could tell you from the private finance world, that's been one of the biggest leaders. I actually have a bidding war going on for a piece of space, which I've advertised as a sublease. Very, very nicely built private equity type of space in a great Union Square, Fifth Avenue location. And I've got 3 private financial services firms who all coming out of big midtown buildings. We have a bidding war for it in a good way. Listen, it's still a sublease. It's still at a discount. So remember that it's a bidding war on a great deal. But that shows you right then and there activity from people who can really afford to go to any building, any space in Manhattan. They're jumping on this, and they fund other companies. So that's a really good spotlight, right, to show us where things are going. And then even the physical numbers in our own buildings, which we're able to track, the amount of people back in the buildings is up probably 25%. And that's a great indicator, right? At the end of the day, it's sneakers, walking across the floor, and we can count that. That really means a lot. It really does.
So 25% up year over year, or just over the last
I'd
month?
say over the last month.
Okay.
Last month. And obviously James Dimon, this is where the media plays back to it. As soon as they see, the big players say we're going to do it, the smaller players are able to push back on that, and then, on that energy, right? I mean, it's nice to get paid to stay at home, but I think a lot of people have had enough of home and missed their team. And ultimately, performance is going to catch up one way or another, and you're going to have to be back on your A game because the world is going forward. I mean, it's in a good way. Thank God.
Yeah. Interesting also that you mentioned that a PE or, financial service firm is coming from their traditional, Park Avenue, Midtown area down to Union Square. That could have an impact. Everything has an impact on a trickle down basis in the neighborhood. So it's not just that office space, but if a boutique firm moves into a space in Union Square, there's probably going to be more that move into that area. That's going to probably attract different kinds of restaurants and things like that, won't it?
It's a great point, Gordon. So during the pandemic, we signed a deal with a company called RTP Ventures. They're a VC firm, been around a long time, successful. They came out of 3rd Avenue Midtown down to the same building at 100-104 Fifth Avenue. Prestigious, great location. And the reality was everybody reset their life, right, during the pandemic. And the work from home model and the neighborhood model, and realizing that brands, especially established brands, no longer have to be in certain areas or buildings to legitimize who they are. And one group, actually that group, one of the principals, wants to walk to work. And that's a big part of life, right? I mean, other people we're working with, I signed a deal. They were people who lived over by, in the Madison Square Park area. And said, Mike, I walk to work. Why not? I've done this. This has been my last year and a half. I don't need to be back in Midtown. And one other piece on that, Gordon, is that Midtown, Penn Station area obviously has been dead from the social end of it. The restaurants, I mean, just brutalized, terrible. When you go below 14th Street or the residential areas, there's been a lot more energy, and people who live in the city who've lived out through this thing. The restaurants are open, the sidewalk cafes. I mean, the energy's there. So the reality is we kind of want to stay within that energy. We've gotten used to it. So, we can do it this way. So like I said, there's a big reset of what we say. And that's a good thing. That it really is a good thing.
Yeah, I'd agree. So here's a really important question for you. You ready?
Go ahead, buddy.
Will white shirts and silk ties make a return to Midtown Manhattan?
Wow. That's a very, in going back, that left a couple of years ago. Thing became more business casual, which I did appreciate because there was a more person-to-person connection. The big corporate firms still they keep that about them. Right. We know several people who just that is corporate attire. I'll be curious to see what the big players do on that. in that nature. But selfishly, I don't miss that. I like this. I really do. I got my sport coat here. It's all good, and I have ties at home. But you know what I miss most, Gordon? I miss a good old handshake.
Yeah.
That is a thing. I can't wait to go back to meeting somebody or seeing someone and giving them a good old handshake, and obviously that'll evolve into a good old hug, right? And that's what we are as people. That's always been. I think that type of medicine is much needed.
Well, humans are social creatures by just their nature. I think people like you and I who are in sales and direct contact with clients, we're really social animals. So that personal connection, the handshakes, the hugs, the sit down, have a beer or lunch, break bread, has been missing. And I think there's so much pent up, like, I can't wait to get out and do that kind of thing again, is starting to happen. I feel it myself, like maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I was like, I'm totally fine not leaving my office in New City and, not having to go into the city. And that hour plus commute was just a drag. But now I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to go back to the city.
You got to see when we bump into people on the elevator now. You actually ride the elevator with other people on a pretty regular basis. It's like, hey, how are you? What's going on? It's right. I miss you. How you doing? What's going on? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is a good feeling. We need it.
I think in terms of feeling, it's also like we feel like, we survived. We made it through. And that's going to have a great kind of push forward effect, I think, for a lot of people as well as it being, good time of year to be out, seeing people, kind of breaking out of the cocoon of the pandemic. It's now springtime, summer's right around the corner. I think everything is going to be really good.
And Gordon, we have to take in a note, a lot of companies have done extremely well over the last year. I mean, you said, Mike, we've been on fire. Things have been so busy. And a lot of people have been like that, right? It's, they may have been on pause. Unfortunately, if things were not going well, chances are, there was an attrition rate. But I think a lot of people just renavigated and have turned this into ways to keep things going on a really, good way. Bottom line's impressive. That's important.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when, just kind of talking about the same thing was, a lot of mental energy goes into driving a company forward. And when you have positive things happening, we're going to see a lot of growth. I think it's just the nature of what we do and how we do it. Knock wood. Hopefully that'll all come true.
A big word I want to just touch on, so much of when I work with companies is asking just some very specific questions. The one is the most obvious. Why are you looking for space, or why do you want to do this? It's the same way a doctor would tell you, okay, I think I broke my arm. And one doctor says, okay, send them to X-ray, or send her to X-ray. And the second doctor you meet says, tell me what you were doing when you hurt yourself. Oh, Gordon threw me the football and I fell. Did you fall in the street? No, I fell. It was grass. Let me touch her. You probably just sprained it. Which doctor you want to go to? Someone that just sends you immediately for X-ray, or someone says, tell me what happened. Back up 2 steps. That's how I approach all my, working with people. The second thing is, tell me about your company's culture. How do you work? That word culture has been forgotten over the last year, right? There's no culture. No one's heard about a generation this or whatever that. How's the culture? How do you work? What's the flow of your space? Who does this? And that's really important. I can't wait to get back to hearing the word culture. And when I bring that up with people, now they're like, that's a good word. I like that. Or our culture stinks and we want to get it back to this. Or, our culture has changed, and that's good also. But having no culture and no interaction, everyone agrees, is absolutely negative.
Yeah, those are great points. I think asking the right questions in any sort of a sales or marketing job is critical to closing the deal and doing the right thing for the client.
Yeah.
If you don't understand where they're coming from, you're really not building a relationship, and that's what's really key to long-term relationships and selling. So great points. Before we go, how about a little background on you personally? You have some crazy hobbies. Why don't you tell us about some of that?
So even though during the week it's what I call the old suit and tie guy, I race cars as a hobby, over 215 miles an hour. It's always been a passion of mine. Restoring things, working things, but racing has always been number one. Also, being a father of a 4-year-old has eclipsed that very, very much. And then you and I share another great passion is scuba diving. We both love to dive. I really enjoy life. I enjoy people. I enjoy the life experiences. But yeah, 2 parachutes and a nitrous bottle definitely always gets my attention.
I thought I held the record for interesting hobbies, but I think you've got me beat, Kaufman.
Happy to take you for a ride, buddy.
Any day, any day. So any other final comments or points that you want to make during this conversation before we wrap it up?
Gordon, I think we touched on a lot of good things, and going forward, I think, my world moves in 6 months and 2 years ahead, right? So a lot of businesses are, it's kind of what's in front of them. Our sales cycles are very long, and just for my team and activity, I think things have become quite busy. I think they're going to become very busy very quick because, as mentioned from the case study, people will be signing deals now for the near future, and that could be even January 1 of 2022. And remember, there's a lot of deals out there now, but as people start gobbling them up, there's going to be less and less deals. There will be a wave of opportunity, just like the stock market or the housing market or any other commodity. Real estate's a commodity. You got to think ahead a couple steps, because waking up a little late, there's a lot of space, but by the way, there's a lot of bad space. There's stuff that's not so, it's a deal, but no one wants it. So, just forward thinking, and any way I can help anybody, as you know, just reach out, pick up the phone, and we'll go from there.
So if you're interested in the market, get in and get in early. That's basically the message before it's all over.
Yeah, and don't think you're too far away from something. It's a real discussion for an opportunity. Get out, at least become educated to the market. See what's out there. Do not rely on what the papers say. Not to be mean, but yes, if you're looking for X hundreds of thousands of feet, there are huge blocks of space, but that only works for the large institutional players. The rest of us, the world, needs to have a different handle on what's available and just not on the corporate side.
And maybe what was kind of considered the thought process pre-pandemic is not necessarily the process today. You mentioned a landlord who's willing to negotiate a deal 8 months out, which probably wouldn't have happened in 2019.
No, you would have gotten pushed off the space. They would gamble, regarding they was probably going to rent it, but there's no way they're going to hold off. They look at the income statement completely different on that basis. So, it's like anything else, different time, different market, and it's just sourcing the opportunities. You need to find out what's right for you, and you may be a 1-year lease person. You may be now's the time to get in. It's like, getting a mortgage at 3%. Why not? I'm never going to get these rates again. Everyone's a little different, but that's okay. That's what we're here to help with.
And I think that all rolls up to why you want to work with an expert. And Mike Kaufman is an expert in what he does in commercial real estate, especially in the office market in New York City and Manhattan. So if people wanted to reach out and get in touch with you, Mike, how's the best way to do that?
Well, there's good old email, and it's a little long, so we can pass that along, or Gordon can post that, or my direct
post it.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm in the office 4 to 5 days a week. I have been since September of last year. So good old 212-471-4320, and always get the phone calls for sure.
Great. And I know you're on LinkedIn, so if anybody, wanted to reach out and connect on LinkedIn, they can do that as well. Is it Mike or Michael on LinkedIn?
It's Michael.
Okay.
Michael. I'm a big believer, big proponent of LinkedIn. I think it's one of the best tools out there.
And Michael uses it very effectively. So, Mike, I want to thank you for joining the show today. It was really a pleasure speaking with you, and I appreciate the time you gave us and the conversation you gave to the listeners.
Gordon, as always, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity and the insight on a lot of things we work on together, and look forward to all being back together again in the near future.
That sounds great. Thanks again, Mike.
Take care, buddy.
All right.
Bye.
That's it for this week's episode of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. In the meantime, Find more interviews and resources at nybusinessleaders.com.